Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So let's commence tonight's Khatirah for the 14th juz. So right off the bat, in the beginning of the 14th juz, Surah Al-Hijr, we have very important verse. Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is saying that we revealed the Quran and we will preserve the Quran. So no ummah in the history of man, no nation in the history of man has shown the consideration to their celestial books like the consideration and regard this ummah has shown to the Quran. I mean, where do we have in history where people they've memorized the book verbatim and that person makes a mistake, you'll find someone to correct it. An example, case in point, is Taraweeh, where the Hafiz is reciting, and if there's any slip up, then you have a bunch of people in the back correcting, so much so that the Imam sometimes has to say that there are appointed people who will correct, and people in the back, they don't need to. I mean, there's no book in the entire world that has this kind of diligence except the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is truly a miracle. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself displayed great ihtimam, great caution when it came to memorization of Kitabullah, memorization of the Quran. He would encourage the Sahaba. The Prophet ﷺ, he would encourage the Sahaba towards ta'aleem, ta'allum. The hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَ, that the best amongst you is the one who learns the Quran and teaches the Quran. This was all so that the Sahaba, they were encouraged in the memorization of the Quran. There was approximately 40 scribes. The Prophet ﷺ had approximately 40 scribes who would write down the Quran, or they would request someone to write. Right? The Sahaba, they would request someone to write the Quran, someone who knew how to write. The Khulafa Rashidin, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, they all knew how to read and write. So they were scribes of the Prophet. Some names come to mind: Shurahbil bin Hasana, Abdullah bin Rawaha, who else? Ubay bin Ka'ab. Then we have Zayd bin Thabit, radiallahu anhum. All of them knew how to read and write, and they were the scribes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they would recite to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam morning and evening, just so that the Quran is preserved. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while in Makkah, he sent a teacher to Medina in Mus'ab bin Umair, who taught the people of Medina to recite the Quran. And he also sent other reciters throughout the lands. Once Arabia came under Muslim rule, he sent qurra, he sent reciters and huffaz to teach the Quran throughout the region. So he sent people everywhere. The Prophet ﷺ sent people everywhere for the sole purpose that the Quran is preserved. Now, after the incident of Bi'r Ma'una, this was a very tragic incident. 70 reciters, 70 qurra, 70 huffaz, they passed away. 70 Sahaba, they've passed away. And the Sahaba, they showed even more, they displayed even more ihtimam, more caution when it came to memorization of the Quran. And the Sahaba, another point is that when they would lead the Salah, especially Fajr time, they would attempt to read from the Tiwal Mufassal, from the long surahs. So there was some like Uthman and Tamim Dari. They would at times finish in one rakat of nafal. They would complete the entire Quran nafal. They would complete it in the they would complete the Quran in one nafil, not in fard. I mean, if we do it in fard, then people are going to start complaining. And obviously, the Prophet ﷺ is on record where he stated that one should keep the salat, the fard. He should keep it short, and he shouldn't unnecessarily lengthen it. Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he would do 60 khatam in the Quran. There were some scholars who did weekly khatam, some scholars who did monthly khatam, and this was all again for the purpose of preservation of the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ himself, he would kana yudarisul Quran ma Jibra'il. He would review the Quran with Jibra'il alayhi salam each and every single year. So the qira'ah and the recitation of Quran, this is mutawatir. It's what we call massly transmitted. There's mass transmission of the Quran. Each generation you have thousands of people who have memorized the Quran. So it's just it's a legacy which has continued from the time of the Prophet ﷺ all the way to this point. And it was completely, the Quran was completely written down in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but it was not in book form. Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, mentions about 29 huffaz from amongst the Sahaba. 29 huffaz just from amongst the Sahaba. Compilation of the Quran, it took place 3 times. Once in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, of course. Once in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, then in the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. And the preservation was done by teaching who? The youngsters. That's how the preservation was done. It was done by teaching the youngsters. And it said, there's a very famous Arabic saying, "At-ta'allum fi as-sighr kan-naqsh fi al-hajar," that learning learning something when young, it's like inscribing something in stone, meaning it stays forever. It stays forever when we learn something from a young age. This is why it's important that whatever habits we inculcate, we try to inculcate these habits when we are young. Sufyan bin Uyayna. Sufyan bin Uyayna, he would say that Saluni an tafsir fa inni hafidhtu al-Quran wa ana saghir. I'm sorry, this is not Sufyan bin Uyayna, this was Ibn Abbas. So Ibn Abbas was how old? About maybe 12, 13 years old when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. So he would tell people that Saluni an tafsir, ask me about the explanation of the Quran, because I memorized the Quran when I was young. This is an Ibn Sa'ad with an authentic chain. In another narration, Sufyan bin Uyayna, who was one of the tabi'is, so he would say that he memorized the Quran when he was 4 years old. I mean, this is not hard to believe because we have kids today memorizing the Quran at 5, 6 years old. So this is not something that's hard to believe. And the people who memorize the Quran, they have continued this legacy of preservation that began in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and will continue till the day of judgment. And there's great efforts and struggle. These great efforts and struggles, it began with Rasulullah ﷺ. The rendition that is common throughout the world, the rendition that we recite, the rendition of Hafs. This is Qira'ah of Hafs, the rendition of Hafs bin Sulaiman. So he narrates from Asim ibn Abi Bahdila, who narrates from Zid bin Hubaysh, and he narrates from Abdullah bin Masud. And Abdullah bin Masud, he learned approximately 70 surahs from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Musa al-Ashari radiallahu anh, he would, when he was in Basra, Kana Abu Musa yatufu alayna fil masjid. He would walk around. You know how the Hifz teacher sometimes walks around while students are memorizing? And he would do this in the Masjid of Basra. فَيُقْعِدُنَا حَلَقًا حَلَقًا يُقْرِئُنَا الْقُرْآنِ. So he would separate us in small groups, and then he would teach us the Quran. He would read to us the Quran. And there's quite a number of hadith just on the preservation of the Quran. Now, the rendition of Hafs, it became the most famous, the rendition that we recite and read and we know. This is the common rendition. And this began in Kufa. Abdullah bin Masud radiallahu anh was the one who was sent by Umar radiallahu anh, and this was what he taught to the people of Kufa, And this rendition, it continued, and all of the, this is how you have, this is just one qira'ah, one rendition. That doesn't mean that the other 9 are incorrect. Those 2 are correct. It's just different pronunciation. For example, there is a difference of opinion in imala. So in the rendition of Hafs, there's only one imala, Bismillahi majreha. Whereas in other renditions, there is quite a number of Imalas means to lengthen it a little bit, or to elongate. So, for example, wadduha would become wadduha, right? And so on and so forth. So that just means to lengthen, to elongate. Zir bin Hubaysh, one of the narrators, he was about 120 years old while he was leading Taraweeh. Abu Abdurrahman Abdullah bin Habib as-Sulami, he narrates from Ali radiallahu an, and he taught for 40 years in the Masjid of Kufa, and he also learned from Zayd and Uthman radiallahu an, from Zayd bin Thabit and Uthman bin Affan radiallahu an. So that just shows that throughout history, how much care and how particular the Sahaba were when it came to the preservation of the Quran. I mean, they didn't consider it something small. They considered it a very serious thing to memorize the Quran and to ensure that the Quran it continues and it's memorized by the coming generations. Okay, continuing on. Let's see, what else do we have over here? Okay, so in Surah An-Nahl, we have فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, that ask the people of remembrance if you know. So if you know, ask the people of in kuntum la. If you do not know, ask the people of remembrance. So in this verse number 43, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically command that when we're stuck with a situation, any kind of masla where we're searching for an Islamic ruling, then we should ask the people of knowledge. We should ask the people of knowledge when we get stuck, and this is the default, that whenever we get stuck with any kind of issue, then the best course of action is to ask and inquire from the people of knowledge. Continuing on, let's see what else we have. Okay. إنما حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل لغير الله فمن اضطر غير باغ ولا عاد فإن الله غفور رحيم. So this is Surah An-Nahl again, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is basically telling us that mayta, carrion, has been made haram upon you, blood, وَلَحْمَ الْخِنْزِيرِ, the flesh of a swine, وَمَا أُهِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ, and that which other than the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is invoked. So when a person is slaughtering, if anything other than the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is invoked, then that slaughter, that animal would be considered as carrion, meaning that it would be impermissible to consume that animal. We should refrain from consuming that animal. And this shows us the importance of reciting Bismillah, that when slaughtering, it is from the Sunnah. It is from the Sunnah to recite Bismillah, and one should not unnecessarily omit recitation of Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, when beginning the slaughter. And we do have the Jewish folk whose method of slaughter is a lot more stricter than ours. Their only issue is that they don't recite Bismillah on every single animal. So they say a prayer in Hebrew. Where, so if they're slaughtering 100 animals, they would say a prayer on the first and last animals. So all the animals in between, they don't say anything. But if a Jewish person, you have to train quite extensively. The Jewish people, they have to train extensively when it comes to the biha. They call it shachita in Hebrew. So they only allow certain rabbis to slaughter, who are called shochats. So it's not like a random Jew can come and slaughter. It doesn't work like that. They have to go through exhaustive and extensive training to learn how to properly slaughter. And then even when they're on the kill floor, there is at least 4 or 5 rabbis who are monitoring all of the animals. So the first rabbi, he would cut from ear to ear, making sure that all 4 vessels are severed. Then the second rabbi, he would check that are the 4 vessels completely severed. And then the third rabbi, he would skin the animal. The fourth rabbi, he would check for lesions. And the fifth rabbi, he would cut the front portion of the animals. So anything past the ribs, it is permissible for their consumption. Anything that's past the ribs, then it's not permissible for Jewish people to eat. So their laws are a lot. Their dietary laws when it comes to slaughter, it's a lot more strict than ours. But Bismillah is something that is a requisite, and when it comes to slaughter. And yes, this is all we have for today. Inshallah, we'll continue with the 15th juz tomorrow. Are there any questions before I get into my questions? And I received an interesting question. So what happened was that in India, someone owned a piece of land that he cordoned off with a wall. And I think during the night, someone came and buried a body in that piece of land. So now, what are the options? I just received this question in the morning. So I responded. I said that as long as, because basically he's usurping that land. So if the body is if it's still fresh, it can be removed and relocated to a different grave. And if the body has decomposed and it's unsuitable to transport, then it's better just to leave the body where it is, because the ihtiram and the respect for the human being has to be observed. This is a condition. Okay, let's see what we have. Okay, Brother Zubair is asking, what are the opinions of the main four madhabs regarding ownership of a dog here in the States? Is it allowed? Yeah, it's allowed, as long as the dog is for harasa, it's for protection, guarding, or if it's a dog where it's a seeing, it's for guiding the blind. So such dogs are permissible. There's nothing wrong with it, as long as a person takes care of the dog. I mean, there is an issue in keeping the dog in the house, but there can be a separate room for the dog in the house. I mean, one should take care of animals if a person has them. Cats, dogs. I mean, the prohibition that's mentioned in the hadith, that's strictly limited to just keeping dogs for fun. But guard dogs, seeing eye dogs, this is permissible. There's nothing wrong with it. One should take care of animals anyway. The Turks, they would take care of dogs, and even now in the rural areas where there's a huge farmlands, they have these what are they called? Massive sheep dogs. I forgot what they're called. I forget their name, but they're just really big dogs. They look like bears. So they still use these dogs for protection, to protecting against wolves and whatnot. So it's permissible. There's nothing wrong with having dogs, and I believe this is all across the board, as far as I know. There is no prohibition. The prohibition is it's limited to just keeping dogs for the sake of pleasure, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take care of them when they're outside. I mean, those who have gone to Turkey, they'll see that these shop owners, these shopkeepers, they have their own dogs which they take care of outside. They feed these dogs quite well, and all of these dogs are very big, muscular dogs. They're just sleeping in the front of the store, just living on the scraps and meat of whatever their owners are providing. Yes, they don't bring the dog into the home, but they are taking care of them. And Islam commands us to be good to animals. There's an entire section in the books of hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he would take care of animals. I mean, even during slaughter, to just drag the animal to the slaughter place. This is just terrible. It should be done with respect and with ihtiram. Not to make the animal more anxious than it already is. Okay, so let's see, what else do we have over here? Okay, this is quite interesting. Right. So there is an accusation. All right. Did the Khalif Umar radiallahu anh, did he burn the great library of Alexandria? So what now the background is that Umar radiallahu anh, when during his khilafah, he had sent Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anh, and Amr ibn al-As, he conquered the Mediterranean port of Alexandria. Alexandria is a city in Egypt. It's a port city. And this was about 20 odd years, about 21 years after the migration. And at the time, the city was the capital of the Byzantine province of Egypt. And the Byzantines, because of this port city of Alexandria, they maintained a maritime influence, a naval influence throughout the Mediterranean. Now, Alexandria, it takes its name after Alexander the Great. And this was an intellectual and cultural center of the ancient world. And it was also home to the great library of Alexandria, a very significant library in the ancient world. And it was home to thousands of manuscripts. And it was so many notable thinkers and writers, they had their manuscripts there. Now, there was so people what some people, they leveled this accusation against Umar radiallahu an, that he told Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As sent a letter to Umar that there's a library over here, and what should I do? So Umar radiallahu an, he told Amr ibn al-As, rather commanded Amr ibn al-As, that burn all the books, use them for fuel, because these books aren't in conformance to Islam. I mean, this is just a horrendous lie against Umar radiallahu anh. He never did anything of the sort, right? He never did anything like this, or even remotely like this, where he had an entire library burned, and he got rid of all of these books simply because they were not in conformance to Islam. I mean, people don't even use their brains. I mean, if that was the case, Egypt was conquered in the time of Umar radiallahu anh. Why didn't they get rid of the Sphinx? Why didn't they get rid of this? All of these pyramids and stuff, which was built by non-Muslims. These are just absurd accusations that people level against Muslims. I don't even sometimes I don't understand the double standards. When we read through not even Muslim history, let's go into non-Muslim history. There was a scholar by the name of Edward Gibbon. He even exonerated Umar, that no, this is just a baseless accusation. So he mentions this in the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And he says very clearly that no, this never took place. Umar radiallahu anh never destroyed it. Rather, it was destroyed way before the Muslims even conquered Egypt. So one scholar, he did write an original paper on this exact topic by the name of Allama Shibli Nomani. So he has written it in Urdu. I believe it has been translated in English. I mean, if anything, people have destroyed Muslim libraries. As I mentioned yesterday, the Ghazi Khusro Beg library in Sarajevo, this housed amazing manuscripts, and it was the sheer grit and determinations of the librarians there, that all of the Islamic manuscripts, they're still there, they're still protected. So anyway, Allama Shibli Nomani, long story short, he traces the allegation against Sayyidina Umar to this guy named, what was his name? Abul Faragius, or some weird name like that. He was the chief bishop of Persia, of the Syrian Orthodox Church in the 13th century. So he wrote an exhaustive history in the Syrian language, and an abstract of this work in Arabic. It's called Mukhtasarud Dual. It's called Mukhtasarud Dual. So this guy, he's the one who leveled this accusation against Umar radiallahu anh, which is a baseless and just ridiculous accusation. So as I said, Gibbon, he has written an authoritative work on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Washington Irving, he was an 18th century scholar. So Lama Nu'mani, he says that Gibbon examined the story, denied its truth, because this Abul Faragius, he was born 500 years after the event. So exactly what is he saying? How is he leveling this accusation against Umar radiallahu anh? And these double standards, I will never understand them when it comes from non-Muslims. They level these baseless accusations. It seems like laws apply to Muslims alone. We have in India, what's that guy's name? What's that president's name? His name escapes me. Modi. Yeah, this Modi dude. So this guy and the Hindus over there, there's always a big hue and cry if a Muslim, purchases a cow or buys a cow or eats a cow or slaughters a cow. I mean, there's mobs of Hindus that will go into the rural areas and just kill so many Muslims. But ironically, the Indian government is the biggest exporter of beef. I mean, seriously, what kind of double standards hypocrisy is that's so hypocritical. So these allegations, when I come across them, when I read them, immediately I start thinking, well, instead of pointing fingers at the Muslims, you should probably point fingers at yourself and check what you're doing before you say anything about us. Okay, so Dr. Hadi, you may have mentioned this, but what happened to the compilations made during the Prophet Abu Bakr's time? So in the time of Uthman radiallahu anh, after the Sahaba, they settled on one authentic compilation, right? And this compilation was based on the original works in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr. So Uthman radiallahu anh, he had those compilations burned, just so that there is no ikhtilaf, there is no divergent opinion. So the seven qira'at, the seven renditions, they still put those renditions. Those renditions were still widely read, but they just wanted a compilation, because in those they never had dots or anything. Those skeletal dots, they never had that. So because they didn't have the skeletal dots and stuff, it was the Arabs could read without the skeletal dots, without the fathas and the kasras and the dhammas. So Uthman radiallahu anh, he in his time, he just had the Arabic script, and that's it. So he had those compilations, the compilation of the in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he had them burned, so that there is no ikhtilaf and that everybody follows one standard, and that standard was what we're reading today. That's not to say that what was in the previous compilations was incorrect. As I said, minor differences in variant renditions and variant qira'at. So one, as I mentioned right now, that one of them was elongation of certain words, like wadduha instead of wadduha. And there are other minor issues here and there, but nothing that would compromise the script of the Quran, the preservation of the Quran. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so no other questions. So we'll conclude for today. If there are any questions, inshallah, save them. You can ask them at a later time, and inshallah we'll get to them. Hopefully everyone, inshallah, is having a good Ramadan, and everyone is doing well, inshallah. Our physicians and nurses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them for their sacrifice. I'm sure they don't have an easy task in going to the hospital and doing their rounds and taking care of patients in the month of Ramadan. Your reward is extra, inshallah. Your reward is extra. One is fulfilling the hukuk of Allah, and fulfilling the hukuk of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So make dua Make dua for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them all, those who are selflessly sacrificing themselves for the sake of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so no more. Okay, no questions. Okay, Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. I miss Dr. Sahib, I miss everybody as well. It's difficult to go to an empty masjid and pray salah throughout the entire day. I miss the entire community. It's that sense of togetherness that and solidarity that we have in Ramadan. Unfortunately, we don't have it in this Ramadan, but we take solace that, alhamdulillah, we are still spending Ramadan with our families. It's a good opportunity to get closer to our family members, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us all safe. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.